Welcome to the Velvet Murmurs, where every whisper hides a secret. I'm so glad you've joined us for today's mystery. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening or watching from. We'd love to hear from our fellow mystery lovers around the world. Miss Marple and the Silence in Lavender Lane. Chapter 1. The Vanishing. It was the sort of summer day the English countryside does particularly well, mild, golden and steeped in the smell of fresh-cut grass and raspberry cordial. Little Dithering's annual summer fête was in full swing on the vicarage lawn. Bunting danced lazily in the breeze, children chased one another with sticky fingers, and the Women's Institute stall was doing a brisk trade in gooseberry jam. Among the cheerful crowd, a modest figure in a lavender cardigan and straw hat moved quietly, her eyes taking in the proceedings with gentle interest. Miss Jane Marple, visiting her niece for a fortnight, had agreed to help with the flower arrangement competition, but found herself instead ensconced in a shaded chair with a cup of tea and a marzipan bun. It was exactly the sort of occasion where, as she often remarked, one observed the very best and very worst of human nature. "I don't know why I bother bringing Emily to these things," said a harried voice nearby. Miss Marple turned her head slightly and observed Mrs. Sylvia Felton, a woman in her late 20s with a sort of flushed, pretty face that had known little sleep and too much anxiety. She was pushing a perambulator with a lace bonnet peeking out, baby Emily, her 11-month-old daughter. "I only turned away for a moment last time," Sylvia muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "And she got hold of the vicar's cat and tried to eat its tail." Miss Marple smiled politely and sipped her tea. It was not long before Sylvia parked the pram beneath the wide canvas of the tea tent and rushed off to retrieve a bottle from her picnic basket. The child inside gurgled once, then went quiet, content in the shade. What happened next would become the most whispered tale in Little Dithering's history. It couldn't have been more than 5 minutes, 10 perhaps if one counted Sylvia's chat with the scone judge and a brief stop at the lemonade table. But when she returned, her face changed. Gone was the pink-cheeked bustle. In its place, pallor. "Emily," she said, peering into the empty pram. "Emily!" The rising pitch of her voice was unmistakable. Miss Marple, already on her feet, crossed over without hesitation. "She was just here," Sylvia cried, trembling. "She was here. I tucked in her blanket. Did no one see?" The tent grew silent as heads turned, expressions changed, and the mood of the fête shifted. Laughter ceased. The brass band played on for a moment, oblivious, before faltering awkwardly to a halt. Someone shouted, "Has anyone seen a baby girl? Blonde, blue romper, lace bonnet." A village-wide search began at once. Teenagers were dispatched to the woods, the pond was scoured, and every cottage within sight was visited. Miss Marple remained calm, standing beside the pram. Her sharp eyes took in everything, the blanket still warm, a faint trace of lavender in the air, a small crushed flower petal caught in the pram wheel. She bent carefully and picked it up. Lavender. Out of season perhaps, but common enough in gardens. Still, something about the scent lingered oddly. The constable, P.C. Daniel Cross, arrived in a flurry, red-faced and sweating. Sylvia was nearly hysterical. "I was only gone a moment. Who would do this? Who would take my baby?" Miss Marple, with soft authority, stepped forward. "Forgive me, Sylvia, but was there anyone you saw lingering nearby? Anyone unfamiliar?" Sylvia shook her head violently, tears blurring her face. "No one. Just the usual crowd." "Oh, wait. There was a woman, I think, near the tent. She had a wide-brimmed straw hat and dark glasses. I noticed her because she wasn't from here. I assumed she was from Langford." Miss Marple tucked that detail away. A girl of about 17 approached hesitantly. I think I saw someone too, near the pram. I didn't think anything of it. Miss Marple turned to her. Your name, dear? Lucy Harpenden, she replied, twisting her hands. She was tall, dark coat, even though it's warm. She bent over the pram and then walked quickly away toward the woods. The woods? P.C. Cross blurted, already moving. Miss Marple remained still. She looked down the village green past the bunting, where Lavender Lane disappeared into the trees. She frowned ever so slightly. That evening, the search went on into twilight. The police called in reinforcements from nearby Combe Vale. No ransom note came, no strange vehicles had been reported. Sylvia, sedated and sobbing, had to be taken home. Miss Marple sat by the window of her niece's cottage that night, knitting untouched in her lap. She'd noticed several curious things that day, and not all of them about the missing baby. For one, Mrs. Braithwaite, the retired midwife, had been oddly tense and had left the fête early, long before the alarm was raised, and the old gardener, Mr. Willis, had been talking to himself near the church wall just before the band stopped playing. She recalled his words. It always comes back, don't it? Always. Blood or bones. It always comes back. Not something one expected from a man staring at flower beds. The next morning brought no news of Emily, but something else arrived instead. Inspector Henry Rudd, tall, greying and calm in the manner of someone who had seen too many tragedies to flinch. Inspector Rudd was no stranger to Little Dithering. He'd once lived there as a boy and knew the countryside well. He began his investigation with brisk precision, but Miss Marple observed him closely. She noted a flicker of something behind his eyes, not just concern, recognition. He approached her that afternoon at the tea shop. Miss Marple, he said, his tone respectful. I understand you've got a knack for these matters. I suppose I have, Inspector, she replied. But it's not a knack, really, just attention. People reveal more than they intend, given the right silence. He nodded slowly. And have they revealed anything to you so far? Miss Marple sipped her tea. Only that this is not about a child who wandered. It's about someone who planned, and someone who regrets. Rudd looked surprised. Regret? Oh yes, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. You must understand, Inspector, children do not vanish without consequence. Somewhere in this village is someone who has lost far more than they expected to gain, and if I may say so, I believe this is not the first time something or someone has gone missing in Little Dithering. Chapter 2. Lavender and Lies. The village of Little Dithering awoke to a grim new day. Church bells tolled gently for matins, but beneath the calm of Sunday morning lingered the sour taste of fear. No trace of baby Emily had been found. The woodlands had been scoured, hedgerows combed, the village pond dragged. Nothing. The pram, with its crumpled blanket and delicate lace bonnet, had become a monument of helplessness, sitting now in the constable's office like a relic from a dream one wished to forget. Inspector Henry Rudd conducted interviews all morning from the parish hall, which had quickly transformed from fête headquarters into police operations centre. Miss Marple, while not officially part of the investigation, had a way of being nearby whenever it mattered. Let's go over it again, said Rudd to Mrs. Sylvia Felton, seated with her husband beside her. You placed the pram under the tea tent and walked away for what, 10 minutes? 8, she whispered, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Perhaps less. I only meant to fetch the bottle and a sun hat. Was anyone near the pram when you left it? She hesitated. Only that woman I mentioned, in the straw hat and glasses. I didn't see her clearly. And you, Mr. Felton? You were at the fête? No, said Mr. Felton, a soft-spoken man with an accountant's stoop. I was in Combe Vale at the hardware shop. Sylvia insisted I pick up varnish for the stair rail. Miss Marple, quietly knitting on the edge of the hall, looked up. The stair rail? A curious choice for a day at the fête. She made a mental note. Lucy Harpenden sat next, nervous, pale, and clearly regretting she'd ever mentioned anything. I didn't really see anything, she said quickly. I mean, I thought I did, but I'm not sure now. Rudd leaned forward. Lucy, you told PC Cross you saw a woman in a dark coat near the pram. Is that true? Yes, but maybe I imagined it. Everyone was rushing about. It could have been anyone. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed just slightly. Young people often dismissed their instincts too quickly. Did you see which way she went? She turned towards the woods. I only glanced. I was getting ice cream. And this woman in the dark coat, what colour was her hair? Lucy blinked. I don't know. She had a scarf. Meanwhile, Miss Marple paid a quiet visit to the edge of Lavender Lane, where the earth grew wild and unkempt, and the hedges had not been properly trimmed in some years. A path led into the trees where shadows pooled beneath hawthorn and elder. She bent and picked a sprig of crushed lavender, out of place, too far from the cottage gardens. She studied the bend in the path where someone might linger unseen, where footprints softened into moss and clay. One set of small impressions, boots perhaps, a woman's size, led off briefly to the side before vanishing. And there, half hidden under a bramble, a small knitted sock. Miss Marple picked it up gently. Blue, with a frilled top. She'd seen it before, on Emily's tiny foot the day before. That afternoon, Mrs. Braithwaite, the retired midwife, was seen heading quickly to the post office. Miss Marple intercepted her as she exited. Such a dreadful business, Miss Marple said kindly. How is your arthritis these days, dear? Mrs. Braithwaite gave a start. Oh, Miss Marple, yes, well enough. Terrible shame, poor Sylvia. I always said that girl was too nervous for motherhood. You didn't stay long at the fête yesterday? The older woman glanced away. Oh, you know me. Crowds tire me out. Yes, but I noticed you left before the baby went missing. Yet you seemed to know she'd vanished when I passed you near the mill path 20 minutes later. Mrs. Braithwaite coloured. Someone must have told me. Indeed, said Miss Marple gently. Do forgive me, only it's so easy to recall events out of order when one is flustered. Mrs. Braithwaite turned and walked quickly away. By supper, rumours had begun to circulate. Some said it was an outsider, perhaps a traveller passing through. Others whispered that Sylvia herself might be unwell, even capable of harm. Still more wondered aloud about Inspector Rudd, whose return to the village, they said, was curiously prompt. At the White Hart, where the villagers gathered nervously over ale and darts, old Mr. Willis, the gardener, stirred fresh gossip. I seen her, he said suddenly, his voice rough. Seen her standing where Eleanor used to stand, just above the hill. Who's Eleanor? Asked the barman, wiping a glass. Willis looked around, then muttered, No one. Long gone, just the wind in the trees. Miss Marple, sipping a small sherry in the corner, took no notice, but her mind stored the name away. The next morning, Miss Marple visited the vicar's wife, a charming woman who kept too many cats and a great many memories. Dear Jane, what an awful few days, she said, pouring tea. I remember when Emily was born, Sylvia nearly didn't survive the delivery, you know. Poor thing was so ill after. And no wonder after what happened to her sister. Her sister? Didn't you know? Sylvia had a sister, Eleanor. Terrible business. She vanished years ago before you ever came to visit. Rumours about a baby out of wedlock. Sylvia never speaks of her. Miss Marple stirred her tea slowly. How very sad. And where did Eleanor live? Oh, just outside the village. At the old Felton cottage before they moved to that dreadful new estate. The house stands empty now, I believe." "And Inspector Rudd?" Miss Marple asked. "Did he grow up here?" "Oh yes, he was quite taken with Eleanor once. Everyone thought they'd marry, but she disappeared, and Henry left the village shortly after. Came back just last year, transferred to Combe Vale." That night, a village meeting was held in the school hall. Inspector Rudd stood before the assembly, calm and commanding. "We are not dealing with an accident," he said. "We are treating this as an abduction, and we have reason to believe the perpetrator is known to the village." A hush fell. Miss Marple watched him closely. There was something personal in his tone, something more than duty. When the meeting ended, he approached her quietly. "You found the sock, didn't you?" She nodded. "Tell me, Miss Marple, what do you make of it?" She met his gaze. "I believe, Inspector, that this is not just a case of a stolen child. This is about something long buried, and someone perhaps who is trying very hard to forget what they did 20 years ago." Rudd looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I think I know who took Emily, but I'll need to be sure. I'll be going up to Lavender Lane myself in the morning." He turned to leave, but Miss Marple's voice stopped him. "Inspector," she said gently, "do take care. Sometimes the past is rather more dangerous than we remember." Chapter 3. The Body in the Thicket. The morning broke clear and quiet, but it brought no comfort to little Dithering. The air hung thick with unspoken fears, as though the village itself was holding its breath. Inspector Rudd had left his lodgings at the old vicarage inn shortly after sunrise, walking alone toward Lavender Lane. He carried no officers with him, no dog units, no noise. Just a small satchel, his notebook, and an expression of resolve etched deep into his weathered face. He did not return. By noon, concern began to stir. The constable, P.C. Cross, knocked on the inspector's door and found the bed made, the tea tray untouched. A young girl at the bakery mentioned seeing him near the woods around 7. By 2 o'clock, a full search was underway. It was Miss Marple who found him. She had set out with a quiet determination, accompanied only by her sensible walking shoes and a handbag with a magnifying glass, a notepad, and a wrapped scone inside. She followed the path down Lavender Lane with the attentiveness of someone tracing memory rather than trail. And there, just beyond a half-hidden stile, where the path curved sharply east into the copse, she found a man's shoe, polished regulation issue. A few yards ahead, beneath the boughs of a hawthorn tree, lay the body. Inspector Rudd, lifeless, was sprawled on his back, his cap beside him, a deep wound behind his left ear, and blood soaked into the mossy ground. His notebook was gone, but in one hand he clutched a small, crushed sprig of lavender. The constables came running soon, after Miss Marple raised the alarm. The area was cordoned off. P.C. Cross, visibly shaken, removed his helmet and muttered something about Rudd being a good man, one of the old kind. The villagers who gathered nearby stared in horrified silence, as if the woods themselves had turned traitor. Miss Marple stood apart from the crowd. Her eyes, sharp behind their lace-rimmed spectacles, scanned the forest floor. The lavender, yes, fresh, not wild, cut and carried, from someone's garden perhaps. But why was he holding it? Murder weapon, a blunt object, likely a rock, based on the wound. No sign of a struggle. Rudd had likely been taken unawares. "I believe he came here to confront someone," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "And he trusted them enough to turn his back." The news spread quickly, turning the village from frightened to frantic. A missing child was already a scandal. Now, a murdered police officer. It was the sort of thing that made people bolt their windows and whisper at gates. The chief constable arrived by dusk, a balding man named Hargrave who spoke in clipped tones and glared suspiciously at everyone, especially Miss Marple. "I understand you were first on scene, madam," he said, brusquely. "I was," she replied pleasantly. "It's always the quiet paths that reveal the most, don't you find?" He frowned. "This isn't a parlour game." "No," said Miss Marple, "it's not. It's murder, and quite a personal one." That evening, as twilight deepened, Sylvia Felton broke down in the vicar's kitchen. Miss Marple sat beside her as she wept into her apron. "I can't take it any more," she sobbed. "First Emily, now Inspector Rudd. What if I'm being punished?" "For what, my dear?" asked Miss Marple gently. Sylvia hesitated. "I wasn't always a good sister." There it was, the word she'd waited for. "Eleanor," Miss Marple said quietly. Sylvia's breath caught. How do you know that name?" I asked questions. People remember things. It's difficult, I imagine, losing a sister like that. "She didn't die," Sylvia burst out. "They said she ran away, but I never believed it. She loved this village. She loved someone here." "Inspector Rudd," said Miss Marple. Sylvia nodded, lips trembling. She was pregnant. And he wanted to help, but father forbade it. They forced her away. I never saw her again. And no one searched? There was a story that she'd drowned herself, but no body was found. My parents changed the subject every time I asked. Miss Marple touched her hand gently. "Do you think Henry Rudd might have discovered the truth recently?" "I don't know. He came to speak to me the day before the fête, asked questions about Eleanor. He seemed troubled. Said the past was beginning to move again." Later that night, Miss Marple walked alone to the old Felton cottage, now abandoned at the edge of the village. The gate creaked, the garden overgrown with nettles and bindweed. But behind the tangled hedge stood the remnants of a lavender patch, still faintly fragrant. She wandered toward the back and found a small stone bench. Beneath it, half covered in soil, was a weathered hairbrush and a child's wooden rattle. Miss Marple bent to examine them. On the rattle, faded but still legible, was the name E.M. She stayed there for some time, watching the shadows lengthen. The following morning brought a small flurry of discovery. Lucy Harpenden was found in tears by the postbox, clutching something in her hand. When asked, she refused to speak to anyone but Miss Marple. In the sitting room of the Harpendens' cottage, she whispered, "I lied." "I know who took Emily." Miss Marple remained silent. Lucy went on, "It was me." A pause. "I didn't mean to, She's my baby, not Sylvia's. Mine. I had her last year. I wasn't married, and my parents made me give her away." "Sylvia arranged it, said she'd raise Emily," I agreed. "But when I saw her in that pram, I broke." "And what did you do?" "I took her. I didn't go far, just to the old mill. I meant to bring her back before anyone noticed. But then everyone was shouting and I panicked, so I left her in Mr. Willis's shed." "Is she still there?" Lucy nodded, sobbing. "She's safe. I checked on her, but I didn't kill anyone. I swear it." Miss Marple gave her a long, solemn look. "I believe you, but your story is going to stir more than a little dust." Emily was indeed found, nestled in an old blanket, unharmed. The village breathed a sigh of relief, but the murder of Inspector Rudd remained. And something about Lucy's story troubled Miss Marple. She knew now who Emily truly was, and she suspected that Eleanor's child, born 2 decades earlier, had not died, but lived among them still, which meant that someone, perhaps someone with something terrible to hide, had killed Henry Rudd not to protect Emily, but to bury Eleanor's secret forever. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Hearth. The return of baby Emily to her mother's arms might have ended the nightmare in another village. But in Little Dithering, relief was quickly tempered by something colder. Suspicion. For one thing, Inspector Rudd's murder had not been solved. For another, Emily's parentage, once accepted without question, was now tangled in a web of whispers. The child had been found unharmed in the gardener's old potting shed. Wrapped in a blanket with a faded embroidered corner, LH the initials read. Lucy Harpenden had confessed to taking her, yes, but what few yet knew was the deeper confession she had made to Miss Marple, that Emily was not Sylvia's daughter but hers, and yet something about that explanation did not sit quite right with Miss Marple. 2 days after Emily's recovery, Miss Marple paid a call to Mrs. Braithwaite, the retired midwife, under the pretext of delivering a pot of rosehip jam. The small cottage smelled faintly of liniment and paraffin. The parlour was dim, curtains drawn, but the midwife was as alert as ever. "I can't imagine the fuss over that child," Mrs. Braithwaite said, as she took the jam. "She was never the brightest baby, not like some I've known." Miss Marple took a seat in the armchair opposite. "You must have delivered hundreds in your time." "Oh, more than I care to count." "And yet," said Miss Marple lightly, "you once told the vicar's wife you never delivered Sylvia's child, that she'd gone to a hospital in Combe Vale." A pause. "I did say that. And yet Lucy told me yesterday that you were the one who cut the cord, in secret, in the back room of her parents' house, at night." Mrs. Braithwaite's hand trembled just slightly as she set down the jam. "She's a liar," she said. "That girl always made up stories." Miss Marple leaned forward. "I think she's telling the truth. And I think you know it." A long silence passed between them. At last, the old midwife exhaled. "It wasn't Lucy's child," she whispered. "It was Sylvia's. But it wasn't her first." Miss Marple sat very still. "I see." 22 years ago, Mrs. Braithwaite continued, "Sylvia's sister Eleanor came to me, in tears, pregnant and unmarried. She was just 17. I delivered the baby myself. A girl, beautiful child, but the family, oh, they wouldn't have it. The Feltons took the baby and passed her off as Sylvia's firstborn. Eleanor left." "She didn't leave," said Miss Marple softly. "She died, didn't she?" The midwife's face crumpled. "I don't know what happened to her. They told me she ran off, but I never saw her again. I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't dare ask." "And that baby girl, Eleanor's child, grew up believing she was Sylvia's daughter?" "Yes." Miss Marple sat back, letting the truth take shape. "So then, the girl Lucy had raised for a year, the baby everyone thought belonged to Sylvia, was not Lucy's daughter at all. She was Eleanor's granddaughter, and that meant Lucy Harpenden was the child of Eleanor, not Sylvia." Miss Marple blinked slowly. She thought of Lucy's pale eyes, the way her mouth curled in concentration, the mirror image of the old photo she'd seen in the vicarage scrapbook. Eleanor's photo. Lucy hadn't stolen her daughter back. She'd stolen her niece, and perhaps, without knowing the full truth. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple made her way to the Felton household, carrying a basket of garden herbs. Sylvia answered the door with tired eyes and a pinched mouth. "Miss Marple," she said, "please, not now. I won't stay long," said Miss Marple gently. "I've brought thyme and mint, good for sleeping, especially when one's heart is uneasy." Sylvia hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the house was unnaturally quiet. A faint hum of the wireless played from another room. Miss Marple sat down in the front parlour and studied the photographs on the mantel. A picture of baby Emily, one of Sylvia and her husband on their wedding day, and a third, far older, tucked into the corner of the frame. It was Eleanor. Long dark hair, a soft smile, eyes looking off into the distance. "Why keep her photo out?" Miss Marple asked. Sylvia sighed. "Because I think about her every day, about what we did, what our parents made us do." "You mean the child?" Miss Marple asked gently. Sylvia nodded. "She was the best of us, gentle, naive. She loved Henry, Inspector Rudd, I mean, but when they found out she was expecting, they forced her to say he'd taken advantage. They sent him away and took her child. I was told to raise her as mine." "She's Lucy, isn't she?" Miss Marple said. Sylvia looked up sharply. "I suspected," said Miss Marple. "The age, the way you look at her." The silences, Sylvia's hands trembled. "Yes, Lucy is Eleanor's daughter. She's never known the truth." "And does she still not?" "She suspects. I think she always has. She hated me as a child, thought I was cold. She adored our gardener, old Willis. He used to say things about blood recognizing blood." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "He told me something similar the other day." That evening, Miss Marple returned home to find P.C. Cross waiting on the garden path. "Evening, Miss Marple," he said, shuffling. "Just wanted to let you know. I found something in Inspector Rudd's room, hidden under the bed." He held out a notebook, leather-bound, scuffed, pages bent at the edges. Miss Marple took it with careful fingers. Inside were notes, scribbled thoughts, names. One entry stood out. Eleanor's death never sat right. Local records incomplete. No body. Midwife evasive. Braithwaite involved. Lucy Harpenden equals Eleanor's child. Felton's buried something deep. Maybe time to confront Sylvia directly. Miss Marple closed the notebook and looked up. "He was killed before he could." "Yes, ma'am," said Cross. "But by who?" Miss Marple stared out across the darkening road. "By someone who knew exactly what he was about to reveal, and who believed that the past was better off, burned." Chapter 5. The Girl in the Hat. The postman had barely finished his morning round when gossip surged once more through Little Dithering. The vicar's wife had seen a constable's motor parked outside the Harpendens' house. Lucy was said to have fainted during questioning. A tear-streaked Sylvia Felton had been spotted wandering the churchyard at dawn, muttering to herself. But amidst the swirl of rumour, Miss Marple remained composed. She had seen this before, how tragedy loosened tongues and blurred facts. It was not what people said that revealed the truth, it was what they left out. And she had one very specific omission in mind, the woman in the wide-brimmed hat. On the morning of the fête, two separate witnesses, Sylvia and Lucy, had described a woman seen near the pram. Both had noticed her. But in the chaos following Emily's disappearance, her presence had been forgotten, buried beneath more immediate shocks. Now Miss Marple returned to the scene, standing beside the spot where the pram had been left. She imagined the woman's path, her movements. If someone had come specifically to take the baby, she would have known where to look, known which child to take. It was no random abduction. She visited Thatcher's drapery, where most of the village ladies purchased their ribbons and sunbonnets. "I'm looking for a hat," she said to Mrs. Thatcher, the owner. Wide-brimmed straw with a blue band. One was worn by a lady at the fête. Tall, perhaps a stranger. Mrs. Thatcher frowned. "I did sell such a hat 2 days before the fête, but not to a stranger. To a local girl, though she said it was for a cousin visiting from Cheltenham." Miss Marple raised a brow. "And which girl was this?" "Lucy Harpenden, of course." Miss Marple paid Lucy a visit just before luncheon. The girl opened the door slowly, cheeks blotchy, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "I know what you're here to ask," she said, before Miss Marple could speak. "The hat, it was mine. I wore it. I said it was someone else because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen near the pram. said Miss Marple. Lucy nodded. "I hadn't planned it, truly. I just wanted to see her up close. Emily, my niece, I suppose." "She's your niece by blood," said Miss Marple gently, "but she was never your child." Lucy swallowed. "I know that now. I suspected it. But no one ever told me. I thought I'd been forced to give her up, when the truth is I was never the mother at all." Miss Marple sat beside her on the garden bench. "Eleanor was, your real mother, and Sylvia raised you as her own to hide the scandal." Lucy turned to her, blinking. "Is that why Inspector Rudd came back?" "I believe so. He never accepted the official story of Eleanor's disappearance. He loved her once, and I think he had uncovered enough to know you were her daughter." "Then, who killed him?" Miss Marple sighed softly. "That, my dear, is still unclear. But someone feared what Henry Rudd might reveal. Someone for whom the truth is more dangerous than any lie." That afternoon, the village constable P.C. Cross arrived at Miss Marple's cottage with news. "We've found Eleanor's old trunk," he said, removing his cap. "Hidden in the attic of the Felton cottage, locked, took some prying open. And," he handed her a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside, a faded photo, a brooch, a birth certificate, and a letter. The handwriting was fine, looping. Miss Marple read aloud, "Dearest Sylvia, they say I must go away. That it will be better for everyone, but I'm frightened. The baby is mine. She should know one day. If anything happens to me, please, please let her know I loved her. Her name is Lucy. I named her for our mother. If I never return, tell Henry I forgive him, and I forgive you, too. Eleanor." Miss Marple's hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter. "Lucy must see this," she said, "tonight." But she never had the chance. That evening, Lucy Harpenden disappeared. The discovery was made by her father just after supper. Her bedroom window was open, the bed untouched, a note pinned to the dressing table. "I can't bear the weight of it, I'm sorry. Tell Sylvia she's free now." Miss Marple immediately raised the alarm, insisting a search party be formed at once, but she herself did not join the scouring of woods or village lanes. Instead, she returned to a different place entirely, Eleanor's old room at the abandoned Felton cottage. It was boarded, dust-covered, nearly forgotten. But Miss Marple had asked P.C. Cross for the key earlier that day, just in case. She stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath her. Dust floated like mist through the shafts of golden evening light. And there, in the corner, sat Lucy. She didn't look up. "I knew you'd come." "I hoped I would," said Miss Marple quietly. "I remember this room, not properly, but the wallpaper, the lavender pattern, I used to stare at it. I must have been very small." Miss Marple sat beside her. "I thought," Lucy whispered, "that if I disappeared here, it would end the cycle. That Sylvia could finally be free of it all. But Sylvia doesn't want to be free of you, child. She spent her life bearing a secret that wasn't hers to carry. And you, well, you've lived a lie not of your own making." "I killed no one," Lucy said fiercely. "I know." "Then who did?" Miss Marple looked at her steadily. "That's the last piece of the puzzle. But it's not yours to solve, my dear. It's mine." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple took out the notebook of Inspector Rudd once more. Chapter 6. A Grave Disturbed. The next morning dawned grey and damp, as though the sky itself had wearied of tragedy. A fine drizzle misted across the cobbled pavements of Little Dithering, softening edges, making the village appear blurred, uncertain, like a memory one struggles to recall. But Miss Marple's memory was clear. She had not slept much. Instead, she had sat by her window through the night, watching the silent churchyard, the tilted stones and the tall figure of P.C. Ethan Cross, who had stood there far too long beneath the yew tree, watching a particular grave. She set out after breakfast, walking straight to St. Mildred's churchyard, where the early mist still lingered among the headstones. She made her way to the far corner where the grass grew higher and the stone markers were older, crumbling, forgotten. There, shaded by ivy and half sunk into the soil, stood a modest, weathered headstone marked E.M., born 1903, died 1903. "The Lord is my shepherd." Miss Marple looked at it for a long while. Then she knelt and ran her fingers over the inscription. "Far too neat," she murmured, "and far too wrong." She had requested the church register the day before, and what she'd found there was telling. The record for this burial had been altered. The original ink scratched over, different handwriting, the name Eleanor blotted and re-entered as E.M. The dates, too, had been shifted by exactly 1 year. It was, in her view, a fabricated grave, not a child's, but a woman's. Later that morning, she met Reverend Hale, a kindly man with a weather-beaten face, outside the church hall. "I do hope you don't think me disrespectful," she said gently, "but I believe a grave has been falsified." The vicar blinked. "Good heavens, which one?" Miss Marple explained. As she spoke, his face paled. "I had no idea, but now that you mention it, my predecessor, Reverend Trellick, had once hinted that not every burial was what it seemed. He said something about a ghost among the headstones." "A poetic way to describe a covered-up death," Miss Marple said. Permission was granted for a discreet exhumation, with Chief Constable Hargrave reluctantly present, along with the village doctor and 2 uniformed men. The soil was damp but loose. It did not take long. The coffin that emerged was old and warped, the wood rotting at the seams, but it was not the coffin of a child. It was adult-sized. The bones inside, confirmed by the doctor, belonged to a young woman, likely in her late teens or early 20s. No jewellery, no personal items, but beneath the skeletal wrist was a single bracelet of silver and blue enamel, still intact. Miss Marple took one look and nodded grimly. She wore it in the photograph at the vicarage. It was Eleanor's. Chief Constable Hargrave exhaled slowly. "So the story was false?" "She did not run away," said Miss Marple. "She was buried in secret, recorded as a child to conceal the true death. The family used the name and date of a Felton child who actually died in infancy years earlier." "And who would have arranged such a thing?" Miss Marple gave him a long, measured look. "Someone with access to parish records, someone trusted, someone who understood both the family's shame and the police procedures, someone like a young constable who was newly appointed then and is now P.C. Ethan Cross." That afternoon, Miss Marple invited P.C. Cross to tea. He arrived in plain clothes, his face drawn, eyes dull with something deeper than exhaustion. "Milk and 2 sugars?" she offered. He nodded silently. She poured carefully, then spoke. "You were 20 when Eleanor died, a junior officer, eager to prove yourself. You were posted here in Little Dithering for 2 years, were you not?" He said nothing. Back then, Inspector Rudd was already gone, sent away under scandal, and Eleanor was alone. Frightened. Pregnant. He still said nothing. Miss Marple continued, gently but firmly. "She died, didn't she, in childbirth? Perhaps by accident, perhaps unattended, perhaps in panic." His hands trembled on the teacup. "I don't think you killed her," she said softly. "But you helped cover up her death. For the Feltons, perhaps they begged you, perhaps they offered something in return." He looked up suddenly. "I was told it was best. For the village, for her memory. She wasn't stable. That's what they said, that it would bring shame on everyone." Miss Marple nodded sadly. "I imagine they believed it. But Inspector Rudd never did. Cross's expression changed. He came to me the day before he died, asked about the records, about the burial. He said he'd found Lucy's birth certificate, the real one, and he'd matched Eleanor's bracelet to a grave that didn't make sense. And then? Cross looked away. He said he was going to speak to Sylvia, to tell the village. And you followed him into the woods. A silence fell. Then, barely audible, Cross whispered, "I didn't mean to kill him." Miss Marple closed her eyes. He was taken away quietly that evening. The village did not gather to watch. It was not justice they wanted to see, but peace. At the Felton house, Miss Marple met Sylvia once more. The woman looked 10 years older, but oddly unburdened. "It was always going to come out," she said. "You tried to protect everyone but yourself," Miss Marple replied. "Do you think Eleanor would forgive me?" Miss Marple's voice softened. "I think Eleanor forgave you long ago. And Lucy? She will need time, but she knows now who she is and that she was loved, even if imperfectly." That night, Miss Marple returned to the churchyard. She stood by the disturbed grave, now recovered, and waiting for a new stone. This time, it would bear the right name. Eleanor Margaret Felton, 1903-1924. Beloved sister, loving mother, at peace. Miss Marple plucked a sprig of lavender from her handbag and laid it gently on the soil. She did not cry, but she whispered, "The past never stays buried, it waits, and sometimes it waits for someone kind enough to listen." Chapter 7. The Long Silence. The days that followed were quieter, though they bore the fragile hush of something wounded, not yet mended. Little Dithering, for all its hedgerows and half-timbered charm, had been laid bare by grief, shame, and truths long denied. But in this silence there was also a kind of mercy, a moment to breathe, to reckon. Miss Marple remained in the village, declining an early return to St. Mary Mead. She stayed on not because she wasn't tired, she was, but because she understood that the most important things in life are said not at the height of drama, but after, in the quiet. And there were still words left to say. She found Lucy Harpenden sitting beneath the horse-chestnut tree near the mill stream, plucking leaves and tearing them absent-mindedly into ribbons. "Are they going to hang him?" Lucy asked, without turning. "No," Miss Marple said, taking the bench beside her. "He's confessed to manslaughter, not murder. There will be a trial, but given his age and the nature of the cover-up, I believe justice will lean toward leniency." Lucy was silent. Miss Marple watched the stream flow beneath the bridge, brown and swift. "I thought I was broken," Lucy said at last. "All my life I've felt like something didn't fit. I looked at Sylvia and thought, why don't I belong to you? And now I know it's because I didn't." "You belong to someone else," said Miss Marple gently, "and that someone loved you very much. She tried to protect you with the only tool she had. Silence." Lucy sniffed. "She died alone." "No, my dear, she died with hope. She wrote your name on that letter. She called you by your real name. That's a kind of love very few ever receive." Tears fell, silent and steady. "I hate Sylvia," Lucy whispered, "but I also don't. And I don't know what to do with that." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You don't have to know yet. There is time. You may never forgive fully, but perhaps you will understand, and that's a start." Meanwhile, Sylvia Felton was walking the long footpath behind the vicarage, stopping only when she reached the edge of the woods. There, at the broken stile, she stood for nearly an hour, her hands folded in front of her, lips moving in quiet conversation with no one but herself. Later that evening, she arrived at Miss Marple's doorstep. "I need to tell Lucy the truth," she said. "I think she knows," said Miss Marple, but she needs to hear it from you." Sylvia's eyes were red-rimmed. "I don't know how to say it." "Say it as if she were your sister," said Miss Marple. "Because in truth, she is." Sylvia gave a broken smile. "The irony is, I always wanted to be like Eleanor, and in the end, I tried to become her. Raising her child, hiding her story." Miss Marple poured 2 cups of tea. "You didn't try to become her. You tried to protect her legacy, and for all your mistakes, you succeeded in one thing. Lucy survived. The next day, beneath a grey sky thick with the smell of approaching rain, the villagers gathered for a short, quiet service at the rededicated grave of Eleanor Margaret Felton. Miss Marple stood with Lucy on one side, Sylvia on the other. For the first time, mother and daughter, not by blood, but by shared pain, stood shoulder to shoulder. The vicar read from the Book of Common Prayer, voice trembling slightly as he reached the final passage. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil." When the prayer ended, Lucy stepped forward and placed a small, folded note on the grave. Miss Marple saw only the first words. "Dear Mum." She looked away, giving the girl her privacy. Back at the Felton house, Miss Marple sat once more in the parlour, where a fire crackled softly. Sylvia handed her an envelope. "It's Eleanor's second letter. I found it in the old recipe box. She must have hidden it before she passed." Miss Marple opened it carefully and read, "To my darling Lucy, I hope you have your aunt's strength and your father's eyes. I won't be there to see you grow, but I hope you find someone one day, an old woman with kind hands, who tells you that the past is not your fault, that silence is not always noble, and that truth, while heavy, can still be carried." Miss Marple folded the letter slowly. "She was wiser than any of us gave her credit for," Sylvia said. "Yes," said Miss Marple, "she knew what the village could not say, that shame is a man-made thing, and that love, when buried, still blooms, quietly, underground." The following morning, as Miss Marple prepared to leave Little Dithering, she stopped by the local shop to buy a final jar of blackberry preserve. The shopkeeper smiled nervously, as if unsure whether to offer condolences or congratulations for her involvement in the case. "Terrible business," he muttered. "But I suppose it's good, what you did. Uncovering it all?" Miss Marple adjusted her gloves. "The truth was always there. It simply needed someone to listen." He nodded. "And what do we do now, Miss Marple?" She smiled. "You go on. You tend your gardens, you mend your fences, and when you pass by that little grave near the yew tree, you tip your hat, not in mourning, but in respect, for Eleanor, for Lucy, for all the women who were never allowed to speak." That night, the village slept. There were no cries in the woods, no footsteps in Lavender Lane, only the faint scent of the herb itself on the wind, as if the past had exhaled at last and gone to rest. Chapter 8. The Truth Among Flowers. The village of Little Dithering had returned outwardly to its rhythm. Chickens clucked again behind white picket fences, teacups clinked in kitchens, the sound of children's laughter echoed faintly across the green. But beneath this calm lay the contours of a changed landscape. It would be years before some villagers dared to speak openly about the murder of Inspector Rudd or the quiet exhumation of Eleanor Felton's grave. Yet the truth had taken root, slowly, gently among them. It bloomed not in headlines or sermons, but in glances, in reconciliations, in freshly planted lavender beside weathered headstones. And Miss Marple, ever observant, ever unassuming, had one final matter to settle before her departure. She invited the key players to tea at her niece's cottage, a simple affair, but deliberate in its guest list. Lucy Harpenden, now solemn and clear-eyed, Sylvia Felton, weary but relieved, Chief Constable Hargrave, red-faced and cautious, and lastly, PC Ethan Cross, brought under quiet guard, waiting for transfer. The kettle whistled gently as Miss Marple poured. "I've brought you all here not to judge," she began, "but to explain. Because only when we understand can we forgive. Or try to." All eyes turned to her. She set down her teacup and opened Inspector Rudd's notebook, the last few pages now weathered and familiar to her. She tapped one. This is what began it, a family tree, drawn hastily but clearly. Eleanor at the top, Lucy below. Rudd had confirmed the birth certificate. He knew the Feltons had passed Lucy off as Sylvia's child, and he suspected that Eleanor had never truly left the village. She looked at PC Cross. "You buried her. In a coffin meant for someone else. Perhaps you were asked to, perhaps you volunteered. I do not believe you struck the fatal blow, at least not deliberately. But you helped a lie grow into a wound." Cross looked down, eyes wet. "I thought I was protecting the community, but you weren't," said Miss Marple gently. "You were protecting themselves, the Feltons, the parish, and yourself. You silenced a girl who should have been heard, and when Rudd came too close, you panicked. You struck him to keep him from exposing everything." There was a long silence. Then Lucy spoke. "But why would Sylvia agree to raise me as hers? Why not give me to someone else entirely?" Miss Marple turned to her with a sad smile. "Because Sylvia was trapped, just as Eleanor was. The Feltons demanded obedience. One sister bore the child. The other bore the shame." Sylvia's voice cracked. "I was 18. I didn't want to do it. But I saw what they were doing to Eleanor. How frightened she was. I thought if I raised you, I'd be saving her." "You never told me," Lucy said. "I was ashamed," Sylvia whispered. "Not of you. Of all of it. Of the silence." Chief Constable Hargrave cleared his throat. "And what of the death certificate, the altered burial record?" "Conveniently tampered by someone who knew both church ledgers and police procedure," said Miss Marple. "Cross was the only person with proximity and motive. The forged entry, EM 1903, was a repurposed infant death, very clever and very cruel." She turned the page in Rudd's notebook to reveal the pressed lavender sprig, still faintly scented. This, I believe, was a message. Henry Rudd had traced Eleanor's story to the lavender field behind the Felton house, where her bracelet was later found. I suspect he returned there one last time to confirm it, and never left. Miss Marple folded the notebook shut and sighed. "The truth, you see, does not die. It lies dormant, and when disturbed it blooms." After tea, Lucy and Sylvia stood awkwardly in the doorway. There was no hugging, no dramatic apologies. Just the smallest moment, Sylvia reaching to brush a leaf from Lucy's shoulder, and Lucy letting her. It was enough. Miss Marple walked alone to St. Mildred's churchyard for the last time before her departure. She knelt beside Eleanor's grave, now newly marked and lovingly tended. A vase of fresh-cut flowers sat beside it, pale violets, baby's breath, and 3 sprigs of lavender. Miss Marple added her own, a single rose plucked from the garden that morning. She knelt there for some time, then spoke aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Dear girl, they remember you now, not the scandal, not the shame, you." That afternoon, the train to St. Mary Mead pulled gently from the station, and in one of its carriages sat Miss Marple, her knitting in her lap, and a faint smile on her lips. The compartment was quiet, save for the rhythmic clatter of tracks. The countryside rolled past, full of early summer and green renewal. Across from her, a young mother cradled a sleeping child. Miss Marple looked at them and offered a warm, knowing smile. The mother smiled back, unaware she was smiling into the eyes of a woman who had just restored a life once taken and rewritten a legacy once stolen. Epilogue. In the months that followed, P.C. Cross was sentenced for obstruction and manslaughter. He expressed remorse and asked to be transferred to a remote post after his release. Sylvia Felton and Lucy began to correspond. Letters first, then walks, then cautious Sunday teas. The vicar's wife organized an annual Lavender Day in memory of Eleanor, celebrating women's stories long left untold. And Miss Marple? She returned to her roses and her lemon sponge cakes in St. Mary Mead. But now and again, when someone asked about Little Dithering, she would nod softly and say, "It's a place where truth blooms, and where silence once wept